All right, this is Algebra 2, May 7th. I've got to get my laptop going to see if this is clear. I've had a few issues today with Wi-Fi. It looks clear. Hey, Jillian. I'm so glad you joined, Jillian. I wish everybody would join because this lesson's a little difficult and they need to watch it live. We don't have too many lessons left. I mean, there's a lot of Algebra 2 that I could do, but the ones that I usually cover with my classes, we've almost done all of them. We have this lesson and then about two or three more lessons in quadratics and then a few in probability. And then we'll be finished. All right, I'm going to get started. I don't think anyone else is going to join. Actually, it's just 2:53. I'm supposed to be starting this at 3. If you have paper and pencil handy, if I were you, I would get it because I think you're going to need to take some notes down on this. This is kind of hard to catch on to at first until you've practiced with it, and I think writing it will help you practice it. Tuesday's lesson was completing the square, and that was super easy. But we needed to know how to do that before we did today's lesson, which is still completing the square, but we're actually solving. So we're going to find the answer for x. And when you're solving for x, remember, you're just trying to find out what x equals to make your entire equation true. So there is some number that equals x that you can plug in to both of these x's right here. And you can work out that left side and get 0 for the answer. Now, so far, we've learned how to solve by taking the square roots. We've learned to solve by factoring and using the zero product property. And now we're going to solve by completing the square. So the first step is to always make sure that the C term at the end of your quadratic trinomial, that last term that's a constant, needs to be on the other side. You don't want to have 0 over here on these. You want to have this 25 over there on the right side. So, to get rid of the 25 on this side, we have to subtract it, because remember, you do the opposite of what's in front of it. So when we subtract it here, it's gone, and you're just left with x squared minus 16x. And I'm going to leave a space and then put my equals. And when you subtract 25 on the right side from 0, 0 minus 25 is negative 25. So that's our first step, to get C over on the right side. Now, once we've done that, we've created this space right here because we have to have a perfect square trinomial. This is where completing the square comes into play. So you know what we did in the last lesson where we completed the square. You take the middle number and you half it and then you square it. And I'm not going to go through teaching that again because that's on the last video. But remember, to complete your square, you take this term that's next to x and you half it In this case, half of 16 is 8. And then you square 8, and that's 64. And that's what you're going to be putting here at the end to complete that square. Okay, now where the new part comes in is we've got an equation. And so we just added a big number to one side of the equation, and it's going to make it unbalanced. So we have to add it to the right side of the equation. All right, so x squared minus 16x plus 64 is now our completed square, our perfect square trinomial. And now we've got negative 25 plus 64 on the right side that we've got to simplify. Now, on the left side, you factor. The right side, you simplify. So when you take this trinomial and you factor it, it's one of those special cases that goes into our parentheses to the second power. And remember, you take the square root of the first term, x squared, take the square root of that, which is just x. Use the sign that's in the middle. And when you take the square root of that last term, 64, you get 8. So x minus 8 goes in the parentheses. Over on the right side, you simplify. Negative 25 plus 64, which is, what, 39? I think that's right. All right, now the left side is in a parentheses to the second power. The right side is simplified. You're ready to solve for x. And when you solve for x, you want to push everything away from x. You want to get x by itself. So you've got to start with this little 2. You've got to get rid of that. Remember, whenever you have something squared, when your variable is squared and you're solving, you've got to take the square root, so that will cancel the little square out. And then you have to take the square root of the right side. Hey, Lori. I just started example 1. Let me go back over this since you just joined. We started out with x squared minus 16x plus 25 equals 0. And because we're solving by completing the square, this term at the end, the c, you don't want it there. You want it over on the right side where my 0 is. So we started by subtracting that 25. And when you subtract the 25, it leaves this side, and it comes over here as a negative 25. Then that 64 is not really there at this time. Okay, so this is what you've got. X squared minus 16x equals negative 25. Then we have to do the process of what we did that was so easy on Tuesday. We have to complete the square. So you take half of 16, which is 8, and square that, and that's where the 64 comes from. And so now, since we have an equation, we've got to add 64 to the right side. So x squared minus 16 plus 64 is my perfect square trinomial. And then we have to simplify negative 25 plus 64, which is 39. So we factor this trinomial into x minus 8 to the second power. Take the square root of it to cancel out the 2, and that means we've got to take the square root of 39. That's where we are now. I know that's kind of hard to go back and look at, but you'll understand it whenever I get to example 2. So when you take the square root of x minus 8 to the second power, you're going to be left with just what's in the parentheses, x minus 8. Remember, when you're solving an equation using square roots, you've got to always put the plus or minus. And 39, you can't take the square root of it, so you leave it 39. Well, now remember, the whole point of this lesson is to solve. We're actually solving to find our answers for x. So you've got to push this minus 8 over to the right side by adding 8. And when you add 8, we write it differently when we're doing these quadratics. We're going to be left with x. This minus 8 goes to the other side, and it's going to become plus 8. And I'm going to put that positive 8 in front of my plus or minus right here. So that's going to be 8 plus or minus the square root of 39. And then you just split your two answers up. You've got to do 8 plus the square root of 39 and 8 minus the square root of 39. So x equals 8 plus the square root of 39. And I believe your IXL is going to ask you for the decimal answer. If it has a square root button there that you can press, then you can just leave it like this. But I'm pretty sure it tells you to change it to decimal and round it to the nearest hundredth. Alright, so far we've got 8 plus the square root of 39, 8 minus the square root of 39. And now we've got to actually get those decimal answers. So on your calculator, we're going to do 8 plus the square root of 39. Hit equals. And then it doesn't give you the decimal. If it doesn't give you the decimal answer, you've got to change it using your SD. That means switch to decimal. I don't know that that's actually what the SD stands for, but that's what I say. And you have to round to the nearest hundredth on these, I believe. So the hundredth spot is where that first 4 is. Look, 1 past it. And if that number's 5 or higher, then you would round that 4 up. But because it's below 5, it stays a 24. So 14.24. And then you do it again with the minus in front of the square root of 39. Alright, so clear my calculator. I'm going to do 8 minus, the square root of 39. Hit your SD key for change to decimal or switch to decimal. Round it to the nearest hundredth, which is where that 5 is. It's going to either be 0.75 or 0.76. So you look 1 past it, that goes up to a 6, 1.76. And those are your two answers, 1.76, 14.24. Alright, I told y'all, see, this is kind of long and complicated, so I'm going to do several examples. Hopefully by the last one, everybody's going to understand it. But it does take some practice. You are going to need to copy this as we go, because it helps you learn it. Oh, crap, it's blurry again. It was so clear during the last video. Alright. Oh. There. My live button keeps flashing on and off like it's not connecting really well. I've been doing that all day. But it looks pretty clear right now. This is an 18. I don't know if you can see that very well. It's broken up again. Alright. This next example, this one starts out differently in that the C term is already over here on the right side. I've already got 19 on the right side. I don't have 0. See, on this example 1, I started out with my C on the left side, and we had to move it over to the right side. This one, we don't have to move it over. So we're ready to go ahead and complete the square on the left side, which is the last lesson we did that was super easy. So remember, to complete the square, you take half of the 18. You always find the number that's in front of your variable that's to the first power. And you just take half of that. Well, what's half of 18? Half of 18 is 9, and I'm just going to write it down here so you won't forget it. Half of 18 is 9, and then you always square that number, so 9 squared. And that's what we're going to add to both sides of the equation. So we're going to have h to the second minus 18h plus 9 squared, which is 81. Remember, when you have an equation, keep the equation balanced, you've got to do the same thing to both sides. We've got to add our 81 to the right side. Once we've done that, if you'll look, we now have a perfect square trinomial, and we have to factor that. So when you factor it, it goes into your parentheses to the second power. You take the square root of h to the second, which is h. Use the middle term. Take the square root of 81, which is 9. On the right side, you have 19 plus 81. And that is 100. So after you have completed your square and added your number to both sides, then you factor the left side and you simplify the right side. And now you're ready to take the square root of both sides. Trying to solve for 8, move the little 2 and you've got to move the 9, and you start with the little 2. So you take the square root to cancel that square out. If you take the square root on one side, you've got to take the square root on the other side. The square root cancels with that 2, and you're just left with the h minus 9 that's in the parentheses. Remember, when you're solving with a square root, you always put plus or minus. Now this one, we can take the square root of 100 because that's a perfect square. What is the square root of 100? It's 10. So you put plus or minus 10. You don't have a square root left. Now we've got to solve for this h, so we've got to move 9 to the other side, the minus 9. So we move it to the other side as a plus 9. So you're going to get h equals, remember, I want you to put that plus 9 in front of the plus or minus. So it's 9 plus or minus 10. There's no square roots left in that. So you don't really need your calculator on this. You can just do 9 plus 10 and 9 minus 10. So h is going to equal 9 plus 10, which is 19. And h is going to equal 9 minus 10, which is negative 1. And those are your two answers. I like that kind where you don't have to work with your calculator. It's still not focused really well, is it? I hope you can tell what that is. Can y'all tell what that is? Can you see it? Or am I wasting my time? Is it clear enough? It looks like it might have kicked everybody off. The video looks like it's clear enough on my end, so I'm going to keep going. And then you can watch this. If y'all got kicked off, then y'all can watch this maybe on later on YouTube or either here on my Facebook page. All right, let's move on to example 3. Example 3. All of these directions are going to say the same thing. I didn't write them down, but they're all solving by completing the square. And I'll just write that up here. Solve by completing the square. So n squared plus 16n minus 43 is your equation. Remember, you only want the squared term and the linear term, the n squared and the n, on the left side. You want your c term over on the right side, and it is. So you don't have to add anything or subtract anything to the other side yet. You're ready to go ahead and complete the square. So when you complete the square, to do that, here you take half of 16, which is 8, and then you're going to square that, and that's going to be 64. So you're going to do n to the second plus 16n plus 64. And on the right side, you've got to add 64 also. Is anyone still there? Can you, if you're there, because it's showing me that everybody got kicked off, but if you're still there, can you just put a smiley face? Alright, so apparently nobody's there. I'm sorry, y'all, about my Wi-Fi, but it looks clear, so maybe everybody's just having connection issues. Once we've added 64 to both sides, we're ready to take this perfect square trinomial and factor it. Remember, when you factor these, it's always going to be in the parentheses to the second power. And so, take the square root of n to the second, which is n. Use the middle sign and take the square root of the last term in that trinomial, and that's going to be 8. So you have n plus 8 to the second power. And on the right side, negative 43 plus 64 is going to be 21, positive 21. Now you're ready to take the square root of both sides, because we're going to solve for n, so we've got to get rid of the exponent too. So you're going to do the square root on both sides. That's going to be n plus 8 equals, remember to always put your plus or minus, and then your square root of 21. Now we have to subtract the 8. So that's going to be n equals, put the negative 8 in front of your plus or minus. And now work that out with your calculator. Negative 8 plus the square root of 21. Use your SD key, and that's going to be negative 3.42. We did that by saying negative 8 plus the square root of 21. And that came out to be negative 3.42 as one of your answers. And then we've got to do, again, negative 8, but this time we've got to do minus the square root of 21. And so negative 8 minus the square root of 21 is going to be negative 12.58. Be very careful. Be very careful whenever you are entering these, because if you don't round it right, if you were to put negative 12.59, they're going to count it wrong. So make sure you round these right. Oh, it looks like I have someone back. All right, example 4. P squared plus 12p minus 13 equals 0. Remember, when you're solving by completing the square, this last term in your trinomial can't be there to start out. It needs to be on the other side. That C term needs to be moved over here where my 0 is. So we're going to add 13. When you add 13, you're left with p squared plus 12p. And the 13 just disappears over here. And when you add 13 to 0, you get 13. So actually, we're just taking that minus 13 and moving over there and making it a plus 13. Okay, so now we want to complete the square, which is what you did on the easy lesson Tuesday. So you're going to take half of 12, which is 6, and we're going to square 6, which is 36. So we're going to add 36 to the left side, and you have to add that same 36 to the right side. Now that's one mistake that students make a lot when they're doing this. Is they forget to add it to the right side. Make sure whatever you do to the left side, you've got to do it to the right side. So now we're ready to factor this trinomial into the binomial to the second power. Take the square root of p to the second, which is p. Use the sign in the middle. Take the square root of the last term, which is 6. And then equals. And now you add these two together and get 49. All right, so we are ready to solve for p now. So we want to get rid of the exponent 2 by taking the square root. That means we've got to take the square root of the right side. When you take the square root, it just cancels that little 2 out, and you're left with your p plus 6 that's in the parentheses, but drop your parentheses. On the right side, always put plus or minus, and then take the square root of 49. And this one is a perfect square, so you can take the square root of that and get 7, and you won't have any more square root in the problem. Now you want to subtract your 6, and when you subtract that 6, that negative 6 goes in front of the plus or minus. And so now you get your two answers, and it's going to be negative 6 plus 7, and that is equal to positive 1. And then you do the same thing, negative 6, but you put minus 7, because remember, you've got to do the plus or minus. And that's going to equal negative 13. And we have one more example. When you see this trinomial, or it's not a trinomial right now, when you see this equation, you have 2h to the second minus 24h equals negative 50. There's something different about this problem than all of our other problems. Do you see what that is? The thing that's different is we have a coefficient, a number, in front of h squared. And you can't have a number there. The completing the square process, you don't want to have a number there. So we want to start by, if you ever have a coefficient in front of h squared, you want to divide that whole problem by that number. So I'm just going to put a big fraction bar and divide it by 2. And when you divide it by 2, you get h to the second minus 12h, and I'm going to leave a space right here, equals negative 25. And the reason I left a space is because I want to complete my square, and I'm running out of room. So instead of writing it again, I just wanted to leave a space there. Now we have to complete the square. So you take half of 12, which is 6, square your 6, which is 36. And 36 goes here, and then you've got to also add your 36 to the right side. Now we're ready to factor the left side, which is going to be h minus 6. And you're ready to simplify the right side, which is going to be 11. Now you want to take the square root of each side. That leaves you h minus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 11. Now add your 6 to the other side, and you get h equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 11. So you've got to do 6 plus the square root of 11. And let's see what that is using your calculator. 6 plus the square root of 11, SD, and you get 9.32, and you round that up because of the 6, 9.32. And then when we work that again with the minus in front of the square root of 11, we get h equals 6 minus the square root of 11. 6 minus the square root of 11 is going to be 2.68. Equals 2.68. And that's your other answer. Just be really careful that you round right so you won't miss these problems because of bad rounding. It's drawing fuzzy again. But we're finished with the lesson. Alright. So solving by completing the squares, what we're doing on IXL, Algebra 2, you need to do J10. I'm only going to make you get a smart score of 60 because, you know, these problems are long. You're probably going to miss a few because of the rounding. So just be really careful. Take your time. Get a smart score of 60. I forgot to send your assignment out through Teams yesterday. So I've got to send out Tuesday's assignment plus today's assignment on Teams. So y'all just get all your work done this weekend. And have a great weekend. And I will see you Tuesday. I'm probably going to call everybody, send emails tomorrow. Take care.